Welcome to The Well Woman Show. Each episode is a transformational journey using mindfulness, feminism, leadership, and strategy to support you to thrive personally, generate wealth, and impact your community.
Covid-19 has actually exposed those and brought those inequalities to surface. And similar pandemics in the past have done so, but not to this extent.
And now, here's your host, feminist thought leader, London School of Economics grad, leadership consultant, and transformational coach, Giovanna Rossi.
Hello, well women. Giovanna Rossi here, and today I have a show for you that is actually part 3 in a series looking at disparities in COVID-19, specifically at sex and gender, and taking an intersectional look as well. I speak with Professor Anuj Kapilashrami, who's a senior lecturer and associate professor of Gender and Global Health Policy at Queen Mary University of London. And it's a fascinating conversation. I love it because we talk about her work, but then we talk about her personally as well and who she is. And we talk about how gender and the burden of care play an important role in pandemics. We talk about women's needs in combating COVID-19 and how COVID-19 reveals many inequalities and injustices in our system. All the information shared today can be found at the show notes at wellwomanlife.com/199show. You can also continue the conversation in the Well Woman Life community group at wellwomanlife.com/Facebook. The Well Woman Show is thankful for support from Natural Awakenings magazine in New Mexico and High Desert Yoga in Albuquerque. I'm speaking with Dr. Anuj Kapilashrami. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Really excited to be here.
Great. Well, we heard in the introduction a little bit about your background and your bio, but I really wanted to start with asking you, who are you in the world right now? Who are you right now?
Oh, that's a very interesting question and a difficult one to answer fully. But I'm a feminist to begin with, and an academic activist. And that's really summarizes what my work is and what my ethics and politics is all about. And I've been working in the fields of health policy, gender, and development for 2 decades, of which the first decade was in India. I'm very rooted in 3 different movements and have been very fortunate to be exposed to those perspectives while I was working in India with a women's rights organization. And those 3 social movements have been on sort of people's health rights movement, which was emerging in about 2000 as the People's Health Movement. In different schools of feminist thoughts, I was part of the women's movements and have been very actively campaigning on women's rights issues, on issues around violence, on issues related to Hazara's contraceptives, the 2-child norm kind of policies. And also introduced to the sexuality rights movement. So at the heart, very much an activist. And made my journey to the UK initially to my doctoral work, which was mostly focused on health policy and governance issues in southern context, in the context of India. But the context was so much being defined by a financial crisis, the aggressive rollout of austerity agenda, rise of populism, that led me to extend my work in the UK to look at health inequalities. And I've previously convened or led the People's Health Movement in Scotland, worked both with communities as well as in an academic capacities to really talk about issues around health equity, social justice, and human rights. So that's a very quick summary of who I am.
Yes. Okay. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about the work that you're doing on health equity. I've really been looking lately, of course, at the numbers that are appearing in the research related to COVID-19, and some of the research is showing differences in outcomes.
Yeah,
in critical conditions and in deaths, but the differences between men and women, of course, showing that men are actually dying at a higher rate than women.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you have something to add to that. And I particularly would love to ask you about adding an intersectional approach, which you have suggested is lacking.
Absolutely. So gender is an important and significant determinant of health. And we have seen in previous pandemics as well that in the context of Ebola, in the context of Zika, that there are particular gendered implications of these pandemics, both with regards to who gets infected and affected, but also, more importantly, in shaping the responses, the experiences, and in the burden of care that falls disproportionately on women, for instance. However, what is often lacking in our understanding of pandemics is the different risk factors. Okay, and I think this is also this also speaks to the general gap in our understanding on health inequalities. So, for instance, some of the work that I've been on health inequalities in the UK context, and I've realized that there is a significant bias to couching all the health inequalities debates in the context of a socioeconomic status. And while that really helps us to understand the role and the impact of class and wealth and income, as well as employment on the differential outcomes and the burden of health, it does not capture the whole picture, because we know, for example, that people from of particular ethnicities, people of color, do not necessarily only live in the most or the least deprived areas. And there are unique aspects of social disadvantage that they experience, which impacts on their health outcomes and health experiences of accessing health services. And this is also what we are seeing with the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, there is emergent data is very insufficient to make claims on the social gradient and the extent to which that social gradient operates in different contexts. But we are beginning to look at the sex disaggregated nature of the pandemic, sex disaggregated data, and who are more dying and who are more impacted. There have been just the severity of the outbreak has also prompted calls to better understand the particular women's needs in combating COVID-19. And the UN Secretary General appealed for that. Several other scholars have also criticized a very gender-neutral approach to pandemics in general, and called for the need to include gender expertise in pandemic planning, in the ways we develop response to the outbreak, and also in post-pandemic recovery. Now, while I completely agree with these, I do feel we also need to stretch ourselves to look at how gender then interacts with other aspects of inequalities and disadvantages, and creates vulnerabilities for differently disadvantaged people, including migrants and refugees, as well as people of certain race, ethnicity, and indigeneity, disability, and so on.
Yes. So let's take that, because there are several things that you've mentioned that I want to tease out here. But the first one is you talked about a gender-neutral response to pandemics, and I find this so interesting because it's so true, and it's an issue in a lot of areas, not just in pandemics. Right? Is this sort of gender-neutral response to things? So, but in addition to needing to be more specific about what women need versus what men need based on our gender roles in society, we're also needing to look at what are some of the other intersections of people that we could look at, that we could actually develop better responses and provide better care and better access if we took this information into account. So why isn't that happening? And how are you working, to get a hold of that data, or is it not available? Like, where are you with that?
Sure. No, it's very true. I think the point that you're making about most responses, policy responses, and not only with COVID-19, but most policy responses tend to be quite gender neutral, or they work on the assumptions of this nominal fairness, neutrality of procedural justice, for instance, where they assume that if we give out certain benefits, the population out there would be able to benefit from it equally, right? And what that completely misses is that there are certain structural inequalities and certain institutional contexts that really impact on certain community and certain populations' vulnerabilities and ability to benefit from those and uptake those benefits or particular policy measures. And I think that's what becomes quite critical. If we are already beginning to see that people, that the migrants in several international contexts are experiencing gross human rights violations. We are getting images and we are getting stories every day that the low-income migrant workers are being do not really have any place to go to because they've lost their jobs, which were to begin with very precarious. The transient nature and the mobility leaves them stranded in cities. Villages are not willing to accept them, and they're being sprayed on bleach and other kinds of chemicals as they're always seen very pathologically as these carriers and vectors of diseases. So we're already seeing that there are certain populations who live in very cramped situation, who cannot practice social isolation, are particularly vulnerable and susceptible to COVID-19. Yet they also do not have the ability or the income and the other social protection to be able to combat with the impact of it. So I think here intersectionality becomes very critical. We are only at the very early stage. Unfortunately, much of the data that's being collected is not looking at these different stratifiers. And that's what me and a colleague of mine are trying to push for, to demand that the data that is generated is looking at sex, of the people who are reporting infections, but also looking at the ethnicity, the migration status, looking at the class and other conditions, because that's the only way we are going to have a holistic picture of the pandemic, and would be able to target some of the policy measures, some of the social protection schemes that are being introduced by different countries appropriately.
Absolutely. So I do see this, and I wonder if I would love to hear your thoughts on. Obviously, we wouldn't want to be in this situation, but while we are in this situation, it does seem like a great opportunity to shine the light on some of these issues. And on the one hand, it seems like health equity and health inequity is really being talked about on a level that hasn't before, or not as much. Yeah. And then on the other hand, the other extreme hand is something you brought up, which is that we're seeing these inequities not being addressed. So I'd love your thoughts on some of that.
I think one of the critical challenges, I think pandemic and the COVID has revealed some of these injustices and inequalities. It has not created these, right? So these inequalities and injustices have always been present in our societies, and in some societies to a greater extent than others. And this is what we are really seeing today in terms of the particular vulnerabilities in different countries. And it is only moments like this pandemic where those inequalities come to surface. when people start seeing communities and individuals who've until now been fairly invisible in policy, but also in society. And yes. COVID-19 has actually exposed those and brought those inequalities to surface. And similar pandemics in the past have done so, but not to this extent. And I think that provides us with an opportune moment to really look at public health, look at development issues from a very radically different lens. And intersectionality and a human rights and a feminist response to looking at these inequalities, I believe would be that radical change that public health needs today.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I would just love to see us be further along than we are, so that when heads of state and government officials are making these determinations and giving out instructions about social distancing, that they're doing so in a way that people actually understand what to do and that it actually makes sense for their own lives. Like you were saying, it's much different to tell a family of 4 who, have both parents now working from home, earning a good income, to tell them to do social distancing and send one person to the grocery store. It's very different to tell a family of 10 people living in a house together where everybody's lost their job to do the same thing. And there are probably other more extreme examples as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, and some of the research that we've conducted also internationally, this is actually relevant for both sort of high and middle and all low income contexts, that there are that differential gaze is really important. But some of the research that I've done more recently among low income migrants in India and in also in the context of in the transit context, so of the Balkans, for example, have really revealed the extremely poor living and working conditions, the very precarious nature of their jobs, and the living conditions where a family of 4 to 5 are living in one small room in a broader rooming compounds where there are about 200 people sharing one toilet and sharing one source of water supply. And I think in these conditions, or in conditions where they're working in factories which are still not closed simply because those are the essential services, they're also producing some of the protective equipment without themselves being protected and observing all these precautionary measures that we keep talking about in terms of social distancing, quarantining, and so on. And I think the kind of preventive measures that we talk about becomes completely infeasible and impractical in those contexts. And we're not talking about a small minority. We're talking about millions of populations who of low-income internal migrants in the region of South Asia, and targeting preventive measures, targeting policy responses to these vulnerable groups become quite critical. Yet, what we see increasingly are in countries which are actually looking at migrants only as vectors of disease, as those who would carry the infection and the virus from these cities back to the villages and facilitate that community transmission in those contexts. Their own rights, their own vulnerabilities, their access to healthcare and social protection is just not addressed in these contexts. So I think, going back to the point that you were making, we really need to start thinking about the measures that we're calling for, who is most affected and who is in a position to benefit from those measures. What else do we need to actually bring the curve down? Because I think there's so much of discussion about bringing the curve down without talking about who is infected and what sort of precarious position they are in. What resources do they have available to work on this? And I think going back to the point on the intersections, so when we talk about the caring responsibilities and roles being on women, again, the experience is not similar for all women, because some women, for the class they belong to, the kind of work they're doing, are also able to employ other women to take care of their children. They have living maids and who are able to take care of those needs. At the same time, women who are in domestic work, and most often these are the migrant women, and whether it's in high income country contexts or low middle income country contexts, are unable to be with their children and stop working in these contexts of quarantining. So there is this huge underclass that is continuing to serve people, putting themselves at risk of infection.
Okay, well said. And we're going to highlight some of the points you made here in the show notes. When you go to wellwomanlife.com/podcast, you'll be able to listen to the full interview and see some of the points here that Dr. Kapilashrami is making so eloquently. Professor, I want to just take a quick break and come back with our segment that is a little bit more personal, so we get to know you as a person and as a leader. We'll be right back. I'm so thankful for support from Natural Awakenings Magazine in New Mexico, a monthly green, healthy lifestyle publication, and for support from High Desert Yoga, promoting optimum physical health, clarity of mind, and spiritual inspiration for all. Many of you have followed my journey from consulting to women's leadership and empowerment, starting a nonprofit, raising 2 kids, and everything in between. I've really taken some time this year to focus in on where I can help the most women with their own desire to create social impact and also a good income for themselves and their families. As my consulting and coaching practice is growing, I found that one of my favorite things to do is the free discovery sessions. I love hearing about people's passions for the work they do, sharing what I do, and helping people understand what my hybrid consulting coaching is all about. Hint, hint, serious strategy plus spacious mindset. So if you find yourself worrying about whether you'll ever make it in the thing you're pursuing, or waking up in the middle of the night anxious about money, lacking energy you need to get everything done, or procrastinating on moving forward with projects and tasks, or even if you're in a leadership role, but you're second-guessing yourself and not getting things done, I'd love to talk to you. These conversations help me get clear on how I can help more leaders create the impacts and income they want, so they can start living with ease and joy. Plus, you'll get a free hour with me to get crystal clear on what you want to create for your company or organization and your life, and what's been holding you back. So if you're interested, you can book a call at wellwomanlife.com/learn more. We're back on the Well Woman Show with Dr. Anuj Kapilashrami from Queen Mary University of London. She's gender and global health policy professor. She also sits on the gender advisory panel for the World Health Organization Human Reproduction Program. And Professor, I want to start by asking you, these are pretty personal questions. So the first question is, what does success in life mean for you?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think going back to my own positionality, I've started my journey through with a women's rights organization. So I've always believed in the power of a collective. So for me, ideas of success are really not about individual pursuits. This also reflects on my role of leading and working in larger networks, for example, Migration Health South Asia Network, or also convening People's Health Movement in Scotland. So for me, success would be related to these collective pursuits, and through collective action, being able to influence thought and action.
Okay, I studied collective action in graduate school, and I actually named my consulting business after it. So yes, absolutely. Okay. Professor, can you describe one personal habit you have that contributes to your own well-being, particularly now, as we're trying to stay healthy and well so that you can do all of what you're doing in your life?
Right. I mean, I think it's about the networks that I'm part of, and which are really active, and even in COVID, in fact, more active now. And I think just being connected to people in different country and geopolitical contexts, as well as different work contexts, is something that is keeping me sane in today's times, and also motivating me to do more work in this area. So I think just being surrounded by very, very inspiring women in India, in Pakistan, in South Africa, women in Scotland. I think, to me, just being part of that collective is really quite motivating, and the ability to just be connected on phone and Skype and is what is keeping me sane. But I also really love popular culture, and I love dancing, and that's the only bit that I do besides activism and academia.
Okay, what kind of dancing?
Oh, good question. I mean, I just dance to music. I just move with music.
Okay.
But I do what Britain told me I did several years ago is Bollywood dancing.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So, I mean, I didn't realize that up until then that
that's what it was.
Dancing was being framed as Bollywood dancing in the UK.
You could probably give a class on it. Bollywood with Dr. Anuj. Okay, great. Well, couple last few questions here. What superpower did you discover you had only to realize it was there all the time?
Oh, I'm not sure. I think it's just the energy that I derive from inspiring people around me, and in turn be able to inspire people in those who are part of that collective. I think that is what I would say. I'm also conscious of, I mean, I think, and that there is always, elements that you can draw from people and learn in your own pursuit. And that's something I feel that's quite critical for just moving on. I mean, the context and the times that we're living today, where everyone's really pressured, stretched, that we just come together to draw all that energy from others and from the exciting work people are doing.
Okay. And what advice would you give your younger self, say, 10, 15 years ago or more?
I think I do feel that it's really important for people to ask, to connect, and to continue to question the powers that we see today. And I think over the years I've learned to do that more. But I do feel that the contexts that we are living in today, where the sort of context of the state, the context of the market, and just the importance of not taking some of these sort of dominant or hegemonic understandings without questioning them, without challenging them all the time, is what I would recommend people to do.
Okay. And last question, I usually end the show asking a question that you actually answered for me at the beginning of the show. So I'll go a little deeper with it. You said you identify as a feminist. What does that mean for you?
I think what I've really been fortunate is being exposed to very different schools of feminist thoughts from early on, being part of a women's rights movement. And I've also been inspired by feminists from India, by feminists from Pakistan, feminists in South Africa, as well as feminists in Europe and the US. So what it really means to me is having the sort of the context where there is equality, there's equal opportunities, and also the ability to constantly question the ways in which exclusion is being created every day from by different institutions, whether it be the state, the market, the religion, and others.
Okay, I love that. And it's so important for us all to question ourselves too, and how we are participating in those exclusions.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's a constant and a very conscious reflection of the privileges and the oppressions that we are continuing and continually living with. And I think that's something that even the move from India to the UK really exposed me to, when I've always understood myself as very privileged, coming from a middle class background in India, belonging to an upper caste Hindu family, and having a good education and was provided for by my parents, and also moving to India when I was given the label of being part of the BAME, Black Asian Minority Ethnic Community. I also understood how those privileges and the disadvantages are constantly changing and being shaped by the broader contexts that we are living in.
Okay, so important. Thank you so much for your time. I've been speaking with Dr. Anuj Kapilashrami. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you, Giovanna. I've really enjoyed talking to you on these issues.
That's it for our show today. Remember, if you need support to live your Well Woman life, head over to wellwomanlife.com/Facebook to join our community. As a reminder, we are on NPR every week, so be sure to tune in at npr.org/podcasts and search for The Well Woman Show. If you enjoyed today's show, please take a moment and subscribe and leave a review. This helps raise visibility, which is super helpful when it comes to producing the show every week. For feedback, comments, or just to let me know you were listening, find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Well Woman Life. I'm Giovanna Rossi for The Well Woman Show. Until next time, have a super powerful week.